Are there any staff introductions?
I think we need to turn on these microphones.
Thank you. Board members, I am grateful for the opportunity to be here today. So thank you for having me. And I believe under one of your agenda items here, agenda item number 3, I was hoping to, if you would give me the opportunity to recognize Phil Dow. So again, thank you for having me here. And my name is Susan Branson, Executive Director of the California Transportation Commission.
And I want to also thank Susan for being here and let our board members know how unusual it is for her to make the trip out to our TPA meeting like this. So we're very, very appreciative of her being here today. So, and then also welcome to our new board members. We've got several new, two of our 3 new members here today. So welcome. And just to let you all know, we will be doing a board orientation at our March meeting. So if there are some things today that you have questions on, know that there will be opportunity for further discussion next month. So.
And we're a little short-handed today. We're minus our clerk assistant, so we're all kind of filling in. We should be able to get everything done.
Yes, she's, you know, she chose to be at the birth of her grandchild. We don't know how she could prioritize that over being here with us, but that's the way it goes. So anyway, yes, so exciting day for her and her family. So, all right, with that, I've got a presentation on some of the highlights of our regional transportation projects and programs, as well as an opportunity to discuss some issues, some rural transportation issues. And I think I have to do it from the podium.
Advance your slides.
Yes. So I've prepared a presentation to highlight some of the transportation projects and programs that we've completed in recent years. This will be for Director Branson's benefit, but also some additional background information for our new board members. Can you all hear me okay? This microphone is kind of far away. So the presentation will include an overview of the region, a discussion of just some of our projects and accomplishments, highlighting some of our current and upcoming projects, and then a discussion of unresolved issues. So the Mendocino County region has a total population of approximately 87,497. That includes 4 incorporated cities, the city of Ukiah, Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena. And we are also home to 10 federally recognized tribes. The region has a total of 790 miles of paved streets and roads and 327 miles of unpaved roads on the local system, and about 400 miles of state highway, many of which serve as Main Street to our rural communities. So before going into projects, I want to highlight some of the programs that have been successful in the region. So in 2002, MCOG initiated legislation that allowed cities to seek transportation sales tax independently of the county. And subsequently, 3 of our cities were successful in securing transportation sales tax: Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena, and they were among the first in the state to become self-help cities. Our 4th city, Ukiah, also has a sales tax, although that sales tax is a general tax with an advisory measure that directs it to transportation. advance too soon. We also have funded the pavement management program for the region. That includes the annual fees, condition surveys, system updates, and training for local agency staff. Several years ago, MCOG created the partnership program using regional surface transportation funding. And this provides funding for multi-agency projects such as the roundabout at Simpson Lane and State Route 1. And as the RTPA, MCOG is also responsible for managing Transportation Development Act funding that comes to the county. And for decades, MCOG has maximized funding for transit, which is provided by the Mendocino Transit Authority and senior centers in the county. And MCOG does not award this funding for streets and roads projects. And we have also sponsored a number of community planning efforts in some of the rural communities throughout the county, including Point Arena, Wallala, Westport, Covelo, Laytonville, Anderson Valley, and Hopland, in an effort to stay involved in some of the often overlooked smaller communities. And we have also provided training opportunities for local agency staff, including the well-attended traffic control for safer work zones that took place just last week. And of course, I would be remiss in a discussion of transportation programs and funding if I didn't mention SB1 and the increased funding that is bringing to our region. So our region will benefit in many ways from SB1, including through the Local Streets and Roads program, which is estimated to bring about $67 million to the region over 10 years. The Local Partnership Program, which provides a minimum of $100,000 a year to our self-help cities. Increased funding in the State Transportation Improvement Program, as well as increased funding through the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, or the SHOP. Increased transit funding, and then of course our local agencies will have additional opportunity to compete for larger pots of funding in the competitive programs such as the Active Transportation Program. So now I will move on to highlighting some of our projects that we've completed over the years, starting with a project that Director Branson is familiar with, the Willits Bypass. Through decades of planning and multiple STIP funding cycles, MCOG, in partnership with Caltrans and supported by the CTC, committed to completing this massive project. Travel in and through the area has greatly improved, and the City of Willits is now seeing post-bypass benefits, including new sidewalks, bike lanes, and a much improved Main Street corridor. But the Willits Bypass is not the only thing that has happened in our region over the last few years. Simpson Lane Roundabout at the junction of State Route 1 is another example of a successful partnership between MCOG, Caltrans, and the County of Mendocino to install a roundabout at an intersection that previously had significant safety issues. Rail trails are a fairly new addition to our transportation system in the county. The Mendocino County Rail with Trail Corridor Plan was completed in 2012, and since then a number of segments have been implemented or are currently being implemented. The City of Ukiah has completed a first phase through the city and has secured funding for the second and third phase through the City of Ukiah. And of course, we are excited to announce that the City of Willits was just awarded $6 million as part of the Active Transportation Program by the CTC just last week for the segment that extends through the City of Willits. And with the recent passage of Senate Bill 1029 and initial assessments and planning underway for the Great Redwood Trail, we feel that the agencies within the region are well positioned to implement additional segments. So the California Coastal Trail in Fort Bragg is another unique feature in our transportation network. The coastal trail runs along the bluff tops through the city of Fort Bragg, through the old Georgia Pacific Mill site. The northern and southern portions were open to the public in 2015. Funding for the central segment was approved in Cycle 3 of the Active Transportation Program and was open to the public last spring. So it now provides a total of about 5 miles of trail parallel to State Route 1 through the city of Fort Bragg, and it draws thousands of users both locally and from out of the area. So just a few months ago, the County of Mendocino completed the Branscombe Road pedestrian bridge in the community of Laytonville. This community of Laytonville is one of our rural communities that was subject to one of the community planning efforts. Highway 1 is Main Street in Laytonville, and the bridge, this pedestrian bridge, was actually the final project in their priority projects that were identified in that planning effort. And you can see the rickety wooden pedestrian bridge that this new bridge is replacing here in the picture. So that'll provide a safe path of travel for pedestrians and bicyclists crossing 10 Mile Creek. So there have been significant efforts in the region to improve routes to school for students. The infrastructure improvements in the area have focused primarily on closing sidewalk gaps, providing bike lanes or paths, and traffic calming. And many of our jurisdictions have received Safe Routes to School grants, and now that Safe Routes to School is part of the Active Transportation Program, they continue to seek those funds for projects such as the recently completed Chestnut Street multi-use facility in the city of Fort Bragg. In addition to infrastructure improvements, MCOG is wrapping up a 3-year-long non-infrastructure Safe Routes to School project in partnership with the County Health and Human Services Agency, the Walk and Bike Mendocino program, and 7 school districts throughout the region. The program included bicycle and pedestrian safety education, outreach to the community to encourage safe driving, development of crossing guard programs, establishment of volunteer-led walking school bus programs, and of photo voice projects that identified obstacles that students face on their way to school. And this is a picture of one of the bicycle safety programs with students. So call boxes and electric vehicle charging stations are a couple examples of how MCOG is using technology to improve travel through the area. While many regions in the state are pulling out their call boxes, MCOG continues to maintain a system of 143 call boxes, and due to the lack of cell phone service throughout the county, those call boxes are still used regularly by the traveling public. And in fact, because of the non-existent cell service in many parts of the county, we installed the first satellite call boxes in the country, and we now have 44 satellite call boxes in our system. And then the electric vehicle charging stations are another thing that until recently the county was lacking, just like they're lacking cell phone service. But MCOG has been instrumental in increasing the availability of electric vehicle charging stations, making sure those are available to the public. We developed the Mendocino County Zero Emission Vehicle Regional Readiness Plan, which included community outreach, recommendations for charging station sites, and cost estimates. And we have also provided support to the Mendocino Land Trust's effort to bring charging stations to the state parks. And in 2016, we partnered with ChargePoint to provide vehicle fast chargers along Highway 101 as part of a statewide network funded through the California Energy Commission, and those were completed in 2018. So that completes the highlights of our completed projects, and now I want to highlight some of the current or upcoming projects. So we have 2 downtown streetscape projects currently in development in the county. One in the city of Ukiah will include a road diet and provide bike lanes, widened sidewalks and other pedestrian enhancements, and other street operational improvements. It was originally a transportation enhancement project and is now funded with a combination of STIP, or State Transportation Improvement Program funding, and HSIP, which is Highway Safety Improvement Program. The second streetscape project in the city, or the town of Wallala, it is partially funded through the STIP, and it was identified in the Wallala Community Action Plan. Currently, Wallala lacks sidewalks or bike lanes, and the coastal community becomes very busy during the summer, and the shoulders get crowded with parking. So the project will provide a safe and comfortable means of travel for pedestrians, and then also improve traffic flow by controlling access points to the highway. And this picture, this is the only marked crosswalk in the town of Wallala. So another upcoming project is the US 101 and North State interchange. There are actually a couple of things happening in this area. North State Street runs through a very busy and growing part of Ukiah, and the interchange with 101 is a primary point on and off of 101 for people that are accessing the commercial and industrial areas, as well as area schools and this county government center that we are in right now. And both the County of Mendocino and Caltrans currently have projects in development that will provide improvements in that area. We also anticipate a number of pedestrian improvements coming up, because we are currently wrapping up a pedestrian needs inventory and engineered feasibility study that is building on previous planning products and including extensive public outreach to identify pedestrian improvements that we believe will be competitive in the active transportation program and other grant programs. This is an example of some of the public outreach that was used during that plan. The Covelo State Route 162 multi-use trail is funded through the active transportation program, and it was identified in the Covelo Round Valley non-motorized needs assessment and engineered feasibility study as a top priority. It'll provide a safe path of travel for pedestrians and bicyclists traveling along State Route 162, which is Main Street through the community of Covelo. It provides access to the commercial part of town and other important destinations, including the Tribal Health Center and tribal administrative offices and schools in the area. Currently, 162 has no shoulders or pedestrian facilities, and bicyclists and pedestrians are forced to walk along the fog line or in the lane of vehicle traffic. And these photos, these are Phil's favorite photos because they really illustrate the problem. What they don't really show is the speed at which most of these vehicles are probably traveling. The speed limit on the outskirts of Covelo is 45 at the lowest and goes up to 55 miles an hour. So unfortunately, the conditions there have resulted in an alarmingly high both accident and fatality rate for pedestrians and bicyclists.
I just want to add that this photo here, this is not a multi-lane highway. There's somebody passing there.
Right, yes. So the project is fully funded through the active transportation program, and it is unique for MCOG in that we are actually functioning as the implementing agency for this infrastructure project. So that concludes my overview of some of the upcoming projects that we have. And I hope that it's evident that MCOG and our local agencies are providing a lot of good projects and programs for residents as well as visitors to the area. There are just a couple of unresolved issues that I do want to highlight as well. First, similar to the town of Paradise, we have a lot of rural communities in our region that have limited circulation, often with only one way in and one way out. The size and frequency of fires in our region is increasing. Just last year, both Mendocino and Lake County were hit by the Mendocino Complex Fire, which was the geographically largest fire in state history. And then, of course, just a few months later, we all watched the terrible news out of the Paradise area as the Camp Fire raged. So the need for second access or emergency evacuation routes is an emerging issue that is of importance to MCOG, our local agencies, as well as the public. Unfortunately, there is not an apparent appropriate funding mechanism for these routes. The funding that would be required to provide public routes to all of these remote areas is beyond funding expectations that we have locally, and private emergency evacuation routes might be easier to build but are difficult to fund. So this is something that I know is not unique to Mendocino County. It's come up at Rural Counties Task Force meetings, and so I'm sure it'll be a continuing topic of discussion around the state. And then finally, I just want to talk about the difficulty in funding rural projects in general. Although I think that our region has been relatively successful in competitive programs, there are some projects that just will never be funded because either they can't compete or there isn't an appropriate fit as far as funding programs. And then, of course, our formula dollars must stretch further in a rural region because although we don't have as many people, we still have a large responsibility in terms of infrastructure. So it's important that the needs of rurals be acknowledged in funding programs, and we at MCOG will continue to encourage that when program guidelines are being developed. So that concludes my presentation, and I want to again thank Susan Branson for coming up today, and I will open it up to any comments or questions before we go on. And again, for board members, many of the programs that were briefly mentioned in this presentation will be discussed more in depth at our orientation in March.
Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you for coming, and I like that presentation a lot. It certainly shows that we have some critical issues in our area, especially with the emergency access routes, because we do have only one way in and out of populated areas. Like I have an area in my district of over 5,000 people who only have one road in, and so that's an important issue. And the other was on Highway 162 up in Covelo, and like Mr. Dow said, there have been a high incident of fatalities and accidents, and we just had one a week ago, I believe. I don't think it was on the stretch where they're doing the project, but it is happening with regularity, unfortunately. So thank you for being here and listening to that.
I appreciate your presentation today, and I guess, while I'm here, the secondary and evacuation routes is a huge issue for us that we want to work with you and our other partners across the state on how best can we develop the plans that we need, get the plans in place, and then implement those plans. We recently did, the chair and the vice chair and myself were provided a tour of the town of Paradise, and with a former Caltrans district director, now the town of Paradise Mayor Jody Jones. And we asked her, about what could be done to either add capacity. We have a Highway 5 and Highway 99, Highway 70. what could we do? And she did talk more about there are areas in that town where there's no way out. There's just one way in, one way out. And so it becomes more of a local road that we need to worry about. And so what we do know is Caltrans has planning money, planning grants. Not sure how far along your city or the jurisdictions are on planning. What would those key evacuation routes be? But where we are in a position where the solution's already known, what we do want to do this year, we'll be embarking on, we have a series of competitive programs, and we'll be embarking on refining our guidelines. The guidelines are what we do to really lay out the plan for how projects are selected. And we do want to build into those programs some recognition, some way of bringing those projects that are necessary to take care of secondary and evacuation routes. We want to highlight those and move those up. And so we'll be working with the rural counties task force and the representatives on how best we can do that. There are so many needs in the state, but we know with climate change, we need to have adaptation strategies in place, and we need to recognize that it's a new day, and we need to take care of making sure people can have a way out should there be a fire, a mudslide. We had the Oroville Dam. There's just been a number of crises. So just want to assure you it is also at the state level. It's at least at our commission, it's on our radar. And it's something that we are very concerned about, and we share that concern with you.
If I could follow up on that just a little bit. Supervisor Hashak represents the northern part of Mendocino County, and I represent the northern part of the Mendocino coast. And
Okay.
you might think, oh, on the coast, could there be concern about fire? And I've been surprised at the number of phone calls and emails I get subsequent to the Mendocino County fires we've had in the last few years, and then of course the fire up in Paradise. And it's because we have this Mediterranean climate where it doesn't rain for 5 months out of the year, and so even though someone's house might be a mile off the California coast, they're again access in one road in, one road out. So the largest community in Mendocino County that has one road in, one road out is in Supervisor Hashak's. The second largest is actually in mine,
Is that right?
but closer to the coast. But it's a wooded area, and again, there's one road in and one road out.
Yeah.
And so one thing that we've seen in a couple examples, some options for creating emergency access routes are sometimes on private property, and they might not, the private property owners have not to date necessarily shown a willingness to make it a public year-round road.
Yeah.
And so the issue that we're looking at is like, well, maybe we can get permission for the property owners to create an emergency access gated, but it still needs to be maintained a couple times a year just to make sure that if there is an emergency, either emergency vehicles can come in through that route or passenger vehicles can go out. And so the question is, the traditional funding sources are focused on year-round public roads,
Right.
not these private driveways that have a gate on either end. And so I'm
Right.
curious if there's been any thought, or there could be some thought into how can we, through the public realm, create a revenue stream that's can be spent on emergency access routes that would otherwise maybe be just considered a pedestrian trail
Yeah.
the rest of the year.
So this is it's really interesting. I don't know. I think that would require, I'm just speaking off the top of my head right now, I have very talented staff. I think that may require a legislation authority to do that. And but the good news is the commission has a role of statutory responsibility for advising the legislature and the administration on transportation policies and programs. And that's something that I just wrote down.
Yeah.
So that's something that I will go back and ask my staff to look into this, and it's something that we could work on this year as, commission staff in formulating that. And, maybe we can work with your staff as well on, what would that recommendation look like for the legislature to consider. And just, share a little bit about us on the legislative recommendations that the commission does make. Every year, after the commission issues those recommendations, as staff, we invite the members, staff, so like the staff to the legislators, to come over. We go to the Capitol, And so for the last few years, we've had standing room only of the staff to the members, and we share what those recommendations are. And what we like to have is, a couple of contacts for any legislator that might want to carry legislation so that they know who they can work with. And we've had pretty good success. Not all of the commission's recommendations are enacted, but quite a few are. And so I appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to follow up too on the active transportation program. I may stand up. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
On the active transportation program, that program is so oversubscribed. And I really appreciated the presentation today to see the good projects that the commission has been able to fund in this region, this county. We recently had a call for projects. We had, for a statewide competition, we had $220 million. And just for the statewide, we had over, I want to make sure I get this right, it sounds so high, $2 billion in requests. So it's a very, very competitive program. The needs are great across the state, but where an applicant agency can show, a picture like we saw there, and the solution is going to really provide great benefit. Those are the projects that are rising to the top for funding, and you really should be proud of the projects that have made its way through these programs because of the amount of competition. We're not done. This is an ongoing program thanks to Senate Bill 1. That bill did double the amount of money for that program. And so it's just so oversubscribed, but we'll be embarking on another round of funding here pretty soon, in about a year and a half or so.
And I want to add, just on the emergency evacuation route issue for Director Branson, but also for our new board members. MCOG has applied for a climate change adaptation grant to do some planning in the areas of emergency preparedness and evacuation planning. So hopefully that will be successful, and then we can really prioritize where we need those routes.
First of all, I want to apologize for being late. Coming from Fort Bragg, it was quite a traffic issue. I wanted to just first say I'm new. I'm Tess, and I'm from Fort Bragg. But I had 28 years with CAL FIRE before, so I'm pretty familiar with alternate access roads for Fort Bragg, at least. But Council, I can't call you Councilman, Supervisor Dan Jurdy is correct. There are several fire problems in Mendocino as well, and one of them is the pygmy on Road 409, 408, that area, mostly 408, the Little Lake Road, that road, and the dump road. Those roads are pygmy, highly fire prone. They're supposed to have fire. As a forester, I can tell you they need to have fire in order to regenerate, and because we suppress fire around homes, we of course have quite a fuel buildup there. So my prediction is that if and when that ever gets ignited, it'll explode. I mean, literally like an explosion. That's the kind of fire we're going to have there. It'll be very hot, and there'll be no exits. I don't know of too many exits out of that road, except possibly through the state forest. And the state forest, Jackson State Forest, where I worked for many years, has a number of gates that could be opened and possibly provide exits, but you'll have to work with them. And of course, they have fire hazard maps. So I hope that when you do this grant that you look into that.
Okay, do we have any public comment? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for the presentation and the feedback. And we'll go to item number 3 on our agenda, which is approval proclamation honoring Phil Dow and a presentation of the California Transportation Commission resolution, followed by a recess.
Okay. So, as our long-term board members know, but our new board members may not, Phil Dow stepped down as director in June of last year after 20 years as director, and even before director, after working, you know, another at least decade as the planner for MCOG. When that happened in June, it happened rather quickly, and we didn't have time to formally acknowledge him at that time, although our representatives from Caltrans District 1 did come down and acknowledge him at that time. Since then, we have been trying to coordinate a time when Director Branson could come to one of our meetings, and this is the time for that. So we want to today formally acknowledge Phil for his years of service, and I do have a proclamation that I would like to read. Whereas Philip J. Dow has served as Mendocino Council of Governments Executive Director for the past 20 years, as the Transportation Planner for over 30 years, and a registered traffic engineer since 1984, and he is retiring after a career of more than 40 years in transportation. He has been a champion for often overlooked remote communities such as Wolala and Covelo. Throughout the county, he has shepherded local plans for downtown safety improvements, promoted bicycle and pedestrian projects, supported public transit, and enabled innovations. In 1999, he was awarded the first tranny bestowed upon an individual person by the California Transportation Foundation. His most significant achievement was to facilitate and secure funding of the largest and highest priority project in the Regional Transportation Plan, seeing the Willits Bypass through construction in 2016, persevering through many obstacles over decades of effort. When commissioners saw him coming, they already knew the prime message he brought. He has served on countless statewide advisory committees, advocating for rural transportation needs and securing a fair share of funds for Mendocino County and the North State Superregion in a competitive environment where urban players hold sway. Among the many projects he initiated was polling and state legislation that allowed local cities to join self-help counties in raising voter-approved sales taxes dedicated to fixing streets and roads. Never one to seek attention, his deeds are perhaps better known in Sacramento than among the general public. As a Vietnam veteran, he has volunteered much of his free time to veterans' causes. As a business owner, he has been a reliable donor to youth and sports activities and local law enforcement. A dedicated sports fan, he has traveled ceaselessly to games all across the country. A hands-on guy, no task is beneath him when help is needed. His deep voice instantly identifies him, along with a spontaneous grin and cackle. His blunt, straight talk often cuts through bland decorum, and all of the above has earned him the esteem and fellowship of peers and staff. And, master of the acronym, we wish Phil was writing this himself in his own witty and humorous style. Now, therefore, the MCOG Board of Directors and staff hereby recognize and express our appreciation to Phil Dow for his splendid service to MCOG and the citizens of Mendocino County. We will miss his leadership and wish him a rewarding retirement. So, do you want to say something?
Well, I wrote down some things to say, but I'm not going to. Yeah, it happened about a year ahead of when I had planned on things, but those of you who are in the planning field know that plans never seem to go the way you envision them. So I'm not surprised I didn't quite make it, but I really appreciate this. I was just thinking this weekend that, you know, got back from Vietnam, went to college again, and I had a hard time deciding what I was going to major in because there was too many things that I liked. I knew there were some things that I didn't, but a variety of things, and then eventually I just wound up doing what I'm doing, and you know, short 50 years later, I'm done, and I just feel fortunate to have found something that I like to do.
And we are all fortunate that you found it.
Well, the great mystery's over. I found out what I was going to do with my life. So, thank you for this.
Could I have a quick motion and a vote on this, just to approve our proclamation that we prepared?
I will move to approve the proclamation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we have a second here. Richie, thank you, Richie. All in
All
favor?
in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Who voted no? Thank you.
Okay. Now I would like to turn this over to Director Branson, who has something for Phil as well, and then we can open this up if there are any other people that would like to make comments.
Well, I really do appreciate being here today. When the commissioners learned that Phil was retiring, they were beyond themselves. Phil is over the years, over more than 1 decade, I know, but at least for me, Phil has been a steady presence for the commission. And you know, when you and staff, and when you're working in Sacramento, it takes someone like Phil. It took Phil to be there, to be someone that we could call. He would bring to our attention where, you know, we weren't considering the issues that we need to consider at the rural level from the rural perspective. Those perspectives, Phil's perspective, your perspectives, staff, is critical to the commission. The commission is a statewide body, and that is charged with protecting the statewide interest to the extent it possibly can. And over the years, Phil would come to us and say, in his big voice, "Yeah, this isn't the right thing to do." And we would all listen. The commissioners would listen, and you know, we just have tremendous respect for Phil, his integrity, his credibility, his just his inner self. He's just such a wonderful person, and we really have been honored to work with you. So Phil, with that, we have a resolution, and I would say all the commissioners would like to come here today, especially the chair. She just was not able to, and we don't traditionally have a resolution for every executive director throughout the state that represents these boards and commissions. And so I, again, thank you for letting me be here today. So this resolution from the commission is, I won't go through all of it for the sake of time, but the commission is recognizing Phil as a founding member of the California Transportation Commission's Rural Counties Task Force. Phil was instrumental in starting the North State Super Region Coalition, and he has been a dedicated advocate for the transportation needs of rural communities in Northern California. That Rural Counties Task Force still meets today, and just most recently one of our commissioners attended it, and commission staff is regularly in attendance at those meetings. They're very, very important. Next, whereas Phil Dow developed, fostered, and maintained a sense of partnership and collaboration among the rural transportation agencies of Northern California, the California Transportation Commission, and the California Department of Transportation. And whereas Phil Dow was a pioneer for rural counties, he worked tirelessly to help cities in Mendocino County raise voter-approved sales tax funding that is now dedicated to improving local streets and roads, as well as leveraging funding for safety improvements, bicycle and pedestrian projects, public transit, and innovative solutions for transportation system needs across the region. Whereas Phil Dow persevered in delivering key transportation improvements for the region, most notably the construction of Willits Bypass. It is through his dedication and endurance over several decades and his ability to find innovative solutions to funding limitations and his collaborative approach in engaging local partners that really that Willits Bypass was funded and completed in large part due to your perseverance and your persistence. And you never gave up, Phil. And whereas Phil Dow has been a mentor to many transportation professionals, the voice of rural transportation, and a trusted key advisor at the state level. And whereas Phil Dow, throughout his life and career, has exemplified what it means to be a public servant and dedicated member of his community through his military service and support of veterans' causes, his role as a business owner, his support of local youth and law enforcement, and his commitment to delivering a safe and reliable transportation system for rural residents. Now therefore be it resolved that the Commissioners of the California Transportation Commission hereby commend Philip J. Dow for his dedication, energy, focus, and contributions toward the improvement of transportation in California, and wish him a well-deserved and fulfilling retirement. And Phil, as you retire, please know that you have made a tremendous difference in this region, in this state, not only for the folks that live here today, but for generations to come. So thank you, Phil, for your service and your friendship.
Thank you, Susan. Well, I guess I never really, well, I did kind of wonder sometimes how I was perceived in front of the commission, because as one of my good friends from Nevada calls me Professor Blunt. I get to the point, you know, some of the larger agencies, and I won't mention them, but they might send half a dozen people over to the commission meetings, and they all have different roles. We send one, and it's very important for us to stay involved with the commission and the various committees to know what's going on. But I'm the only one there that typically went, and then I had to get to the point because, well, other people can out-talk me. And I had to get to the point early because there's a lot of people who want to be heard, and there's a tremendous amount of issues around the state, the largest state in the nation. Most of the money deservedly goes to the Bay Area and San Diego and Southern California. That's where it has to go. That's where most of the people are. That's where most of the issues are. But we do have issues here, and that's why some of you new people are here, is to highlight some of those. And welcome joining us today. But we have to remember, and we have to, when we show up as a representative from this area, we have to sometimes speak up in front of the commission and some of the committees and say, hey, wait, you know, that doesn't work for us. And a couple of examples that from my notes that I did write down, I guess it's appropriate to talk about right now for just a minute. And I can't remember exactly what the issue was, but I was in a committee meeting, and I think it had to do with a bunch of transit funds. As you guys remember, the 5308, 5309, 5310. Yeah. Well, and so we were in a meeting asking, well, how do you match these grant funds? Well, the answer we got was the famous words, we'll use your other funds. And we're looking at, what other funds? We don't have any other funds. And that's just some of the issues that come out, and that it's important for us to be at the table on some of these committees that are advising not only the CTC but Caltrans, that one size does not fit all, and we have to come up with a size that's appropriate for us. You know, one of the things that we talked about last year in a committee was in the Prop 1B program, and talking about, well, being competitive for a share of the funds, and with one of my favorite partners from LA Metro, and we were discussing, well, what are the factors you're going to consider? One of them came up with safety. So we look at highway safety and look at accidents, particularly fatalities, and how it should be emphasized when you have fatalities. And so they were all ready to say, okay, we'll give you X amount of points if we have fatalities. When I'm going, wait a minute here. So I have one fatality on a highway that has 1,000 vehicles per day, and mine is just as valuable as far as ranking priorities as when you have 10 fatalities on something on a highway that has 10,000 vehicles per day. And so I did get them to change the criteria to say accept the rates, because if I'm on a highway in Southern California that has 10 times the amount of traffic, and I come up here, I'm 10 times likely to get killed by riding on the highway than somebody else is on that highway. So, so it's being there at the appropriate time to bring up those comments and have CTC staff that understands the issue that says, you know, that is correct. We'll make accommodations for that. That's why it's so important and that we remain involved, and for the benefit of our new members that join us today, you know, that's why we run back and forth to Sacramento, going not only to the commission meetings, but to task force meetings and some of the special committee meetings we have, so that we can explain and make our case to why one size does not fit all, to make sure that we're able to be competitive in some of these programs. So I went off on a tangent, but I said that mainly for our new members, that that's why we go attend these things, to learn how we can compete for the limited amount of funds that were available statewide. So I want to thank Susan for her comments, and like I said, I'm not always sure how I'm perceived. You know, one thing that Susan, as you can tell, one thing we have in common is our voice. And we're both recognizable by that. So thank you, Susan, and thank you for the proclamation.
Thank you. And I know we're going to have a break, but are there any members in the audience that wanted to say anything before we go into a break?
And how do I do it?
Just ignore it.
Pardon?
Ignore it.
Ignore it. Okay, good. Brad Medham with Caltrans. I just want to give one illustration that will help show the influence this man has. I was fortunate enough to be at a Technical Advisory Committee meeting for the Lake APC, the Lake Area Planning Council, and they were taking up the question of funding, of basically taking all of their STIP dollars and putting it on the Lake 29 Expressway segment that's currently fully funded. That meant putting aside local streets and roads projects, and we're talking to a group of public works directors. These are their projects on their roads, and they're much needed. And Phil was able to say, look, you know, this is your time in history. This is your opportunity, and it's unlikely to come again, because the state was ready with ITIP dollars to match. If they put all their money in, then the state would come in as well. And he convinced those folks with, it seemed easy from where I sat, but I don't know, to do that. To put aside their projects, delay their own projects, and put that money on the state highway system. That's the kind of influence he has. So thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Of course, he's from Caltrans.
Full disclosure.
I'm Tim Erickson. I'm one of the public works directors that got buffaloed in that deal. No, I just want to say thanks to Phil. He always the guy who would come in at the last minute to a city council meeting, be there till whatever time I needed him to be, to just say the right things, to either inform the council or sway the council or keep our projects online, and did it with very little recognition from me or gratitude from me, even though we were on to the next thing immediately. But Phil was there, would sit through whatever meetings he had to sit through, and then help us out in the end. And I just really appreciate everything you've done for us, Phil, and our sales tax measure, which I leaned on Phil very heavily to get us. It's just been those kind of things. I've been actually working with Phil for 15 years now, which is shocking to me. But anyway, I just thank you very much for everything you've done.
Thank you, Tim.
Shield, county transportation, same things Tim said. The only thing Phil's really done wrong is given all that money to Caltrans. But other than that, he has been great to work with, and you know, he does advocate for us. He helps us prepare our applications, his staff does. So, you know, MCOG is well run, and they are a great assistance to all the transportation agencies. So thanks. We'll miss you. But I know your staff. Another good thing, just like my organization, the staff does all the real work. So Phil has them so well prepared that even after he leaves, I know they'll continue to do a great job.
That they are. Thank you.
Well, if I could just add one more thing. So as mentioned, Phil was a big part of getting the cities and the county to look at a half-cent sales tax for local streets and roads. Before I was elected to the city council, so somewhere in 1996, I think mid-1990s, the Fort Bragg City Council put a half-cent sales tax on the ballot. It did not pass, but it did pass in Willits and Point Arena. And then Fort Bragg, a few years later, when I was in the city council, we campaigned for it and got it passed, and it's since been reinstated. It had a 10-year limit on it. And so that's made a huge difference in Fort Bragg, Point Arena, and Willits. And more recently, Ukiah has a half-cent sales tax voter approved. It is dedicated to the roads as far as the council is concerned, but in their case, it's not restricted through the initiative. But the council in Ukiah is spending 100% of the money on the roads. So it's made a huge difference. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to pull it off just yet in the county, but the county's looking with envy at the money that the cities have been able to generate. And thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, maybe we could take a break and maybe get a few pictures, and that sounds like a good idea. Okay, we'll take an adjourn for a few minutes.
Now back to reality. I'm taking notes because Marta's with her pending grandkid.
Are we ready to
Yeah, so that we'll
start
resume
up
the meeting
again?
at 2:55.
Okay, we have election of officers next. Following the same procedures we've been doing, which is basically Robert's rules. I'll try to make this brief. So the way it works is basically we put any and all names in as nominations. You don't need to second a nomination, and then we'll have a motion and a second and a vote for each one of those people. So starting off, I'd like to hear any nominations for the office of chair.
I nominate Supervisor Jurdy.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay. Is there anybody else who'd like to nominate anybody? Hearing none, I will take that as a motion in a second. I heard a second there. So, yes. So all in favor of re-electing Dan Jurdy for the office of chair? Just a voice vote.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. He is re-elected chair.
Thank you all.
Dan. Okay. And next, I would like to hear any nominations for the office of vice chair. And the previous vice chair is no longer on the council, so we do need a new vice chair. And last time, it was Mike Cimolino from Fort Bragg, and that's been kind of rotating each year. And I'm hearing no from Director Stransky, so. Basically, the duties are, if the chair is not able to attend a meeting, the vice chair would run the meeting. And I have the duties attached here. That is, and the other thing is they would also serve on the executive committee. So the executive committee is the chair, the vice chair, and a third member. And that meets once, maybe twice a year at the most. So I'm seeing some side conversation, so working this through. Basically, run the meeting if the chair's not here, and he's been here pretty much every time. So you've got to come to the executive committee if you're the vice chair. So we look at budget issues. Okay, nominations. Do I have a volunteer?
I would nominate Mike Carter, but I understand that he hasn't been seated yet. So could we make that a provisional?
I think we could make that a contingent on his appointment, which is supposed to happen tomorrow, I believe, at the Board of Supervisors.
My appointment for tomorrow is as the public alternate.
As the alternate?
Public.
Okay, that is a issue. Did we talk about this earlier? I think we were trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I think we talked about maybe the option of making something contingent, electing an officer contingent upon appointment to MCOG. So I don't know if there's anything that prevents us from doing that.
I think it's just the problem, the unknown, if there will be an elected official who applies for that seat.
Right. So I guess if
because they have the first preference for that seat.
If we were to nominate or elect an officer contingent upon nomination, then I guess worst case scenario would be we would have to change, go back and change that that election in the future.
Or we could postpone this till next meeting.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is we do have to have the executive committee meet this month. That is an issue. And we do not have either of the other two members that served before. So we're going to have to fill up that committee today with 3 members. So we could have it be provisional, and then if something else changes with that Board of Supervisors appointment, we could have another election for vice chair.
I think one way to look at it is that there would be, unless someone else is appointed to fill that position, the alternate fills that position. So it seems that it would stand unless filled by someone else. So if Michael's willing to be the vice chair, and if someone, and John nominated him a moment ago, if there's a second, then I think that could, seems like it
Okay,
could
are there
move
any
forward.
other names? Anyone else interested?
Is there a second?
Is there a second? Okay.
Okay, so then that would be a motion by Director Housecheck. Is there a second for that? Is that what you were?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't hear you. Sorry. Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Director Carter, you are our vice chair for the time being.
And later in our agenda, we do have to appoint a third person to the executive committee, so be thinking about that.
Later in the agenda, we'll be
It meets
doing
again about maybe
that,
twice a year.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. We'll get to that one in a little bit, but yeah, thank you. Okay, now we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, immediately recess, and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And again, for the newer people here, when we convene as the Policy Advisory Committee, Caltrans is participating and voting in the meeting. They'll participate, but voting also. So next on our agenda is public expression. Members of the public are welcome to comment on. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on non-agenda items? Okay. So we'll go into number 8 on our agenda, which is public hearings. We have a public hearing on the unmet transit needs for fiscal year 1920, including Social Services Transportation Advisory Council recommendations of November 15th, 2018.
I'll take that one. So first of all, I'd like a finding of proper notice, and you have in your packet my report that we did publish this as required 30 days ahead of this hearing today in the Ukiah Daily Journal. We also published in several other papers, the Fort Bragg Advocate News, the Willits News, and the Independent Coast Observer. And I have those proofs of publication here, if anybody would like to see those. And other than that, for outreach, we had it posted on our website. We emailed a list of interested stakeholders. That we keep an email listserv of people that would like to know about these things. So that went out well in advance. And I think we also listed in Ukiah Daily Journal's community events. So, do I have a motion and a second for finding a proper notice?
I will move that there's been
Okay.
proper notice.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
We have a motion, a second, declaring that there was proper
Okay.
notice for today's public hearing.
That can be a voice vote. Wasserman.
Richie, second it.
Thank you. Okay. And
All those in favor? Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed? Okay.
Great. Now, we need to open the public hearing. I'll give my staff report first, once the hearing's open. 3:03. Are we ready to open the public hearing, Mr. Chairman?
Okay, yeah, we'll open the public hearing at 3:03.
Okay. And I will start with my report. Again, you have this in your packet. Great. We had a couple new needs come. So we have the list from the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. There's a list of 10 needs that they submitted. I'd like to submit that as testimony. In addition, we have a list also in your packet there from Mendocino Transit Authority. Looks like 15 needs on that. And in addition, they submitted, after the packet went out, 2 more needs that came in at their MTA board meeting on, I think, January 30th. So would you like me to read these out for the record, or we can just refer to the packet? And I will tell you what the last 2 needs are. Okay, so the 2 needs that came in from MTA's board meeting were from our director, Alvin Smith here, increase round trips between Fort Bragg and Santa Rosa. And the second one was from the Hopland Municipal Advisory Council to increase round trips between Ukiah and Hopland, morning, evening, and weekends. So the idea with this is that we will, once these are accepted as testimony today, we'd like to forward these to Mendocino Transit Authority for further review and recommendations by our committees. So
Can I interrupt just a second?
yes.
The unmet need that was brought to my attention was for more weekend round trips.
I did not see that in this email that came. Okay, weekend round trips for Fort Bragg,
Right.
between Fort Bragg and Santa Rosa. Increase the number. Isn't there one on Saturday now?
There weren't enough for this
Okay.
individual, and he can't do weekends, and he
Okay.
needs to get to Santa Rosa on weekends.
Okay, so to clarify, that was weekends, or more, increase weekend trips. Okay. Okay.
Sir.
So that is my report. You have my recommendation. Staff recommends a finding that the testimony heard includes unmet transit needs that appear to qualify under MCOG's adopted definitions. Those are in your packet. Those needs are directed to Mendocino Transit Authority for analysis and for further review and recommendations by the Transit Productivity Committee and the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. So that would normally happen in the spring. The Transit Productivity Committee is 2 MCOG board members, 2 MTA board members, and 1 representative of the senior centers. So there's a 5-member committee. And our SS TAC would also weigh in on prioritizing those needs. So that's what we're asking for after the hearing. And are there any questions about the process? I should also just say that at this point, you don't need to decide what meets the definition. We don't need to do that kind of analysis. It appears to staff that there are unmet needs in this list. This would be sorted out by MTA, and they would look at what qualifies as an unmet transit need under the definitions. They would look at ability to provide service. They would look at priorities and things like that. Any questions?
So then after that's done, then they come back to this committee?
At budget time, yeah.
Okay.
This would come back with a recommendation on any needs that are reasonable to meet, and that's a formal definition of what's reasonable to meet. And I think that's in that same item in your packet with the definitions. So.
And for example, MTA staff has a route committee that's looking at routes, and sometimes they're able to just adjust an existing route and accommodate an identified need. Other times, in order to address one of these identified needs, it would take money, and maybe they'll shift money from one part of the budget to another, or maybe they'll say it's just not worth it given the expected number of riders to address this identified need.
Yeah, there are different ways we can meet needs. We're following a process from the Transportation Development Act, that's TDA, and we administer that act. So this is all pretty much laid out and how you have to do it. What I will note is that we aren't strictly required to do it. The reason, when you must do it is if you're going to use any of these local transportation funds from the sales tax for streets and roads. They're at the bottom of the feeding chain. After administration, planning, bike and pedestrian needs, and public transit. Most of it goes to public transit. And then by council policy, all of our money after the agency's needs go to public transit. We have not given out streets and roads money in over 20 years. I want to say 25 years or something.
No, 98's about right.
98 is probably the last time we did that, 1998. So we have policy that says we don't use this kind of money for streets and roads. in any case, we carry out this process because we find it's a good way to identify current needs, to kind of freshen up the public input every year, reprioritize where those resources are going. So that's why we're doing it, and we do look to try to find, you know, what needs are going unmet. So that's the process that we're following. And did I answer all the questions we had here? Okay.
So,
oh, I think we were talking about what's reasonable to meet, and we can come back to you, but that's in your packet. Basically, there are 4 different conditions. You have to meet a fair revenue proportion of the costs. You have to be able to bring in enough fares to meet a certain ratio. You can't subsidize it 100%. You're not to duplicate other transit services provided publicly or privately. It has to be operationally feasible with vehicles available, and there have to be funds or reasonable expectation that funds will become available. So circling back to that discussion of how do you meet the needs, very rarely do we have enough money to start up a whole new service. More often it comes down to getting a grant, usually they're federal grants, or rearranging routes to adjust to, yeah. For instance, I think this past year there was a need on the list to go to the community pool at the Willits High School and up there, and they were able to adjust their fixed route service, I think, to get there. So things like that. And there have been grants. Some years back there were federal grants that started a service to Laytonville and to Hopland. We had a couple of years of funding for that, but they weren't sustainable, and so those routes were discontinued over time. So it's hard to get a lot of more funding for this process, but we have been able to meet some needs.
okay, well, we did open the public hearing 10 minutes ago. We've reviewed the staff reports, a summary of the different identified issues, and we are, of course, this is a public hearing, so if we have any members of the public or members of the board would like to add any additional
That's right.
unmet needs, now's the time to do it. So, do we have any additional unmet needs that someone in the room would like to add to the list?
I guess not. So we don't often have a lot of people come to the daytime meetings and give their testimony in person. Sometimes I'll get an email or two, but mostly it's coming through our committees and representatives. So.
Okay, not seeing any additional. We're going to close the public hearing at 3:14 and turn it back to the board for determination whether or not the action is a finding that let's see, to make a finding of that after all the testimony that the testimony heard includes unmet transit needs that appear to qualify for MCOG's adopted definitions, and those needs are directed to Mendocino Transit Authority for analysis and for further review and recommendation by the Transit Productivity Committee and Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. Would someone like to make such a motion?
I'll make a motion to recommend
Okay.
Second.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're all present. No one by conference call, so
I don't believe we need a roll call for this one.
okay.
A voice vote is fine.
All those in favor? Aye. Any
Thank
opposed?
you. All right. Okay.
Okay, that brings us to the annual committee appointments. So we, as stated earlier, we will need a third member of the executive committee. We also will need 2 members of the Transit Productivity Committee. And in the past, I've been on that committee. However, because the Board of Supervisors has also appointed me to the Mendocino Transit Authority, I think it's probably better that I'm not on there as an MCOG representative. If I'm going to be on there, I think I should be on there as an appointee of MTA. And I know Tess and I are the 2 two people on this board who are also on the MTA board. So probably in the best circumstances, we would have two transit productivity committee members who are not also on MTA. And then also we have CALCOG, which is the statewide association. We have a voting delegate, we have an alternate. They have some meetings throughout the year, but most importantly, they have an annual conference and a once a year sort of lobby day in Sacramento. So those are the different committee assignments, and I think kind of spelled out what they are. Rich, you said you were willing to serve on the executive committee?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So
That sounds like
by
it.
the power invested in the chair, you're on the executive committee.
Thank you.
And there are two people who are willing to serve on the transit productivity committee. It meets once or twice a year.
And just, it's worth noting that we are proposing meetings in February for both of those
right.
Committees.
Right, before we leave this item, we'd like to see if we can set that date for the executive committee.
I want to do my share, but I don't know anything about these two committees.
Right.
So give me one, appoint me one, and I'll run with it.
Well, there's more transit in Ukiah than anywhere else.
Then
So
which one you want me?
it'd be good if you were on transit productivity.
Which
yeah.
one?
I think it'd be good if you were on transit productivity because. Yeah.
Count me in.
Excellent. So the chair appoints that.
Is anyone else willing to be on the transit productivity who's ideally not also on MTA? MTA will be appointing people to it as well.
The things we do are, well, recommend on that unmet transit needs finding that we were just talking about, making a recommendation on MTA's annual claim for funding. Those are both the budget items. We look occasionally at the transit performance standards that we're using, and we might look at that this year because there's been a change in state law on some of that. And we look annually at transit performance against the standards that we've adopted. So
Michael,
see how they're doing. Yeah.
Would you be willing to go on it? It's only one or two meetings.
And staff did discuss this, and we felt that as long as at least one of the transit productivity committee members is not also MTA, then there would be some balance as long as both of them are not also MTA board members. So it allows some flexibility.
Yeah, the idea is it's partially it's an oversight committee. I mean, we do things by consensus a lot, but it is an oversight committee to see how well MTA is using the public resources that this council allocates to them. So.
I'm an alternate on the MTA, but that shouldn't be an issue, should it? Okay. And you guys don't meet on Friday afternoons, do they?
No, not normally.
Being a little selfish there.
Yeah.
Is that tea time?
Yeah, I play golf on Fridays.
And yeah, we've tried remote meetings from time to time. Sometimes there's a lot of paperwork we're tracking through, and it's easier to be in person. But we've actually gone out to the coast and met there from time to time. So we can be flexible.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so
There.
much.
Okay. So
A little enthusiasm there.
Jim Brown and Michael Carter. Okay. Now
Very
the
good.
CALCOG. There's not a lot of meetings involved here. Again, there's an annual conference, and there's also a lobby day in Sacramento. And there are some phone conference calls you can participate in, but your staff is participating in those phone conference calls throughout the year. So is anyone?
I'm going to volunteer for that. I don't know if you're going to elect me, but I've had a lot of experience lobbying.
Okay.
And writing budget change proposals and all kinds of things in legal terms. So that seems sort of a natural for me.
And it's just a really interesting group, and they cover regional issues that aren't all just transportation either. They're things that everyone's dealing with around the state. So you might find some things that you can really tune in with.
Do we have two appointments? I don't have to be an alternate or the delegate. So if there are two people on the board that are interested, go for it.
No, I would certainly go for alternate.
Okay, so we'll appoint Tess Alban-Smith as the delegate and John Hashak as the alternate.
Okay, and could I just have a quick motion and a vote to confirm that whole slate?
So moved.
Thank you, just for the record. Well, that was Carter for a second? Oh, ask Jack. I hear you, okay. Okay, and just, looks like no
All
one
those in favor?
opposed.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much.
Who
We'll
didn't
keep
take
you
a job?
busy. All right.
So we also have the board annual calendar.
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't try to find a date in February. Before you move on to that, does anyone have their calendar on them? Is it possible to actually, shall we get together with those people before you leave these
Yeah,
chambers,
so
perhaps?
just before we leave, we'll catch up with you and
Okay.
you can.
Okay, I don't want to hold things up here. Thank you.
Okay, are we on item number 10, the calendar?
That's right.
So I think you saw a draft of this calendar at the December meeting. Are there changes? I don't believe there
There
are
were no
any
changes since the last time it was here.
We are planning a tour of the South Coast for our April meeting, and then we typically will potentially plan another tour in the fall. That location of a fall tour has not been determined at this point. You've got the calendar in your packet that identifies the regular things that come up during the year. Does anybody have any questions on the proposed calendar?
It's usually the first Monday of the month. There are some exceptions. We don't meet, for example, in January or July or September usually. It just coincides with holidays. And also there's usually a change for middle of summer in August because it's a long stretch between the June meeting and the October meeting. So we usually meet in late August. We have the third Monday down. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts about the calendar? Yes.
So would someone like to make a motion to accept the calendar?
I move to accept the calendar.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Excellent.
So now we're on to the consent calendar.
The one thing I wanted, just a really minor thing with the resolution on number 13, authorizing the executive director to execute agreements to process funds. I just wanted to spell out Caltrans in that, which I can go back and amend. I don't think that needs a formal amendment.
So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar, which is the minutes of December 3rd, et cetera? The Technical Advisory Committee recommendations of January 16th and the resolution authorizing executive director to process state and federal funds for MCOG's approved projects. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, who was the second? Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor of the consent calendar?
You know what, I think we have to do a roll call because there is funding and there is a resolution.
Okay.
So, I'll quickly call the roll. Director Brown,
Yes.
Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Alban-Smith,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Housetrack,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee and reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. Do we have a motion to ratify what we just voted on?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Now we're on to reports. Do we have I mean, we did have a fair amount of MTA, but is there a particular Mendocino Transit Authority report? I don't think. I'll just mention that we did our annual review of the executive director at our last meeting, and tick that off the list of done. North Coast Rail Authority, Loretta, were you able to get to a recent meeting of theirs?
No, I did not go to the last meeting, but I will be going next week to a meeting in Hillsburg. And Nafili and I have been attending the Great Railroad Trail meetings, as several of you have. Great Redwood Trail.
Redwood
Yes.
Trail.
And so we're monitoring those issues, and as we've reported before, the NCRA is in the process of implementing the requirements of Senate Bill 1029. They are transitioning from a rail agency into a trail agency. So we are continuing to monitor those issues, and I will go to the meeting next week.
And Board Member Hashak is an incoming member of the NCRA board. Not your turn doesn't start yet, but you'll be joining the NCRA board in a few months, I think. In March, yeah. So. Okay, all right. MCOG staff summary of meetings. We have that in our packet. Do you want to highlight any of the meetings?
I don't think that there is anything that I need to highlight. If anybody has any questions on it, any of the items in the summary, I'm happy to answer those questions. For our new board members, just to let you know, this is a standard item that's included in your packets, just to let you know, because we only meet once a month, to let you know the things that have been that we've been working on during the month or since the last board meeting.
Okay. Would you like, administration staff, would you like to go through any of these other items? Caltrans state highway status of projects?
So the state highway status of projects, this is something that District 1, I think it's been quite a few years since we have gotten regularly updated status of projects, but this is something they're restarting. So it is a list that Caltrans District 1 has prepared of projects that are at various stages throughout the county, and if there are specific projects that you have questions about, Rex Jackman is here. I believe this will be updated quarterly, so we'll have ongoing updates of the project status.
And yeah, again, we're kind of trying to be a little more consistent about producing these, and normally there's a map that goes along with it. This time around, due to a number of things, we've had a few vacancies that we've been trying to fill. So among the things that are being impacted by that, we didn't quite get the map together on this one. But again, as Nafili mentioned, it's not a comprehensive list of all of our projects. We sort of apply some discretion and try to select projects that we think are going to be visible or of particular interest to board members and TAC members. So it's a little bit of a work in progress, but it should be more and more perfected as we go along.
Well, thank you for producing this. I can't remember the last time I don't remember when I last saw this. One thought, one of the issues I want to say the more urbanized parts of Highway 1 is some roads that go into Highway 1 have a turn pocket. Maybe there's a different term for it. That's why I would call it a turn pocket. Mm-hmm. And others don't. And in particular, I'm thinking of, say, Mendocino to Fort Bragg, where it's fairly urbanized, fair amount of summertime traffic, particularly even above the average 5 o'clock traffic. And I'm just wondering, how would Caltrans go about sort of considering if they were to add in through the SHOP program perhaps some additional turn pockets on roads that feed to any number of houses that don't currently have a turn pocket.
Right. So we have what are called warrants, like we do for most traffic control or traffic operational type devices or improvements. And the principal thing that would trigger us to consider a left turn channelization or left turn pocket is collisions and traffic and safety. Oftentimes there are rear end collisions associated with people stopped in the through lane to make a left turn, and if we get a concentration of those, then that's one of the first or one of the principal things that we would consider installing, and that would be done through our traffic safety division.
So who's kind of looking at those numbers to see if there may or may not be enough?
Our
warrants?
traffic safety branch, they have a constant monitoring program. If there's a collision concentration in any particular area or at a particular location, that sort of pops up, and then that triggers an investigation. Most of probably all of the left turn pockets that have been constructed over the years have been the result of that process, where there's they start to see a repeating pattern of the same type of collision associated with left turns being made, and after the investigation they conclude that left turn channelization would help to address that. Sometimes if there's a situation where there's multiple driveways in a longer segment of highway, then they might consider constructing what's called a two-way left turn lane, where you see a longer left turn lane that applies in both directions.
So is there a process by which anybody says, can you look at these numbers to see if
yeah,
they're...
you can certainly, you could contact me and I would pass it on to our traffic safety branch if there's a particular location that concerns you, and then they could provide sort of a table that essentially summarizes what's been going on out there over the last 5 or 10 years, and explain whether or not that is considered significant from a statistical perspective. If it is, then that could lead to left turn channelization or other measures like adding shoulders or other things.
Okay, thanks. Is there anything anyone want to make any comments on anything on the list, or what they're not seeing on the list? Okay, well, thank you for the report.
You're welcome.
All right.
You want to refer to the ethics training?
Yeah, Janet, are you going to discuss that?
Yeah, that was kind of more of an announcement. We recently joined the California Special Districts Association. It's one of the benefits. So I understand that elected officers have to take certain trainings, and that's one of them. The AB 1234 ethics compliance training. So that's available through us if you need that. If you need to find a time and date and can't get it some other way, then we have that available as a webinar that we can sign into with our login credentials and show that seminar on a computer somewhere that's convenient.
So that's, Janet, that's something we could go to their location, or would they come to MCOG? If we
Yeah,
could go to
we just
them?
need a computer and a space, and we can do that. And I think it takes a couple hours. I haven't done this myself before. I just know this is something they're offering for free up through March 15th. And we'd be happy to work with you if you need that training. So it would generate a certificate, show that you did that. So.
Do you need a copy, if we've already attended it, the ethics, do you need a copy of that for your files?
We have not to date. I think that would be your elected officer, your city clerk, say.
Okay, but you don't need one for your file?
No, I don't need it.
On file at the city clerk's office is fine?
It's just kind of an additional benefit that's available.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't need that kind of paperwork.
I flunked anyway. I didn't do very good on it.
Thanks for offering. So that's all on that. Just let me know if you're interested in that.
Okay, it looks like you also wanted to just sort of announce that the new MCOG website is completed.
Yeah, I had that site up for a year and a half or two, testing it out, and decided that was the best way to go, and kind of gradually wound down the old site, and I really couldn't even use the old site anymore just because software has moved on and wasn't supported anymore, and it was hard to cross-train somebody on it. It's kind of a clunky, process, and so the new one is just really wonderful to have. I will be, cross-training on that, and we get, again, that's through something I found through the California Special Districts Association, and there's a company called Streamline. It's the parent company's digital deployment, and it's designed specifically for these kinds of small agencies like ourselves and districts, joint powers agencies, and things like that. So it's really a great deal. It's on a sliding scale. We were paying $100 a month with unlimited tech support, no startup costs whatsoever. And now that we're members, it's only $75 a month. I can't beat it. So really great to work with, and I'm still uploading some of the content from the old site that we want to keep, and some archives. I also want to build the community pages that we've been talking about for a long time. For each of the community plans in each of the communities, we've been talking about having a web page for each of those so that the locals can track where we are in this process of trying to find grants and prioritizing projects. So I'm starting to get those up there bit by bit. So.
I just want to say the new website looks really nice. Janet has done a good job with that, and it's a major upgrade. So
thank you.
We'll be getting more and more material on there.
Right. And that's where your board packets and everything else are. So just want to let you know, it is MendocinoCog.org, and even if you were to go to the address we had through special districts, it's still going to go to MendocinoCog.org. Everything is going to go, no matter how you search for it, whatever, it's going to go to our site. So be happy to be done with that. Okay. Yeah, I have just a verbal here on the statements of economic interest. I'm sure most of you have probably filed or about to file. We will need statements from those of you assuming office. So we have a couple of you that we'll need to get a form from. You could, if there are attachments, you could give us the same attachments you had on your regular form that you filed with the county or the city. And just to let you know, I'm still researching what the requirements are as now that there is electronic filing directly to the FPPC at the state. So I know some people do it that way. We have a conflict of interest code that talks about the place of filing and who has to have copies and things like that, and the types of things you're supposed to report. But there has been some change, and now you can file electronically, and we'll be coming back to you at some point, maybe next meeting, to amend that code and decide how we need to receive those. So the idea is we're supposed to get a copy so that if there are any constituents in our jurisdiction that want to see, if any of the board members might have a conflict on anything we're discussing on these agendas, then we'd be able to produce that form and show it to them. So that's why we collect those forms, and usually we're able to get them if you've already filed with the county clerk recorder or with your city clerk. We'll trade copies of those forms back and forth and make sure we all have full sets. But yeah, we just need to have a signed copy of your form. At this point, we're just requesting that you still give us a copy of PDF. An electronic copy is fine for our purposes. So. Any questions on that? Okay.
Okay, so are we on to
miscellaneous?
Loretta?
I don't have any.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Thank you. We are now in the process of developing next year's overall work program. That's this document that you all are probably familiar with. The new members will be learning more about this in our orientation. So we are starting the development for fiscal year 1920, and the draft is due to Caltrans March 1st. MCOG action doesn't occur on the draft. That's done with the TAC. The TAC reviews or recommends which projects we're going to include in the draft. And then we submit it by March 1st. Caltrans will review it and comment on it, and then we'll bring it back to the board for approval of the final document in June. So in this year's draft, we solicited for projects from the county and the cities, and we received only 2, which is quite unusual. One was from the county of Mendocino. It's an annual project that they request to do special studies. And one was from the city of Fort Bragg, which we have found out as of last week that Fort Bragg's project unfortunately won't be eligible because it's not a planning project, it's more preliminary engineering. So I just today advised Fort Bragg staff of that, now that Caltrans confirmed that. So we will be putting together the draft, which includes the annual MCOG staff work elements, local agency projects, which in this case will be the county, the match for 2 Caltrans grant projects that we submitted. If those projects are awarded in the spring, we won't know yet, so we're going to go ahead and put them in the draft. That's due March 1st. And we are also talking to the TAC, and there is some support for reserving a portion of the funding needed to start our next update of the pavement management program, which is an expensive project in the neighborhood of $150,000 each time or more. And it's difficult to fund in one work program, so we're recommending that we reserve a portion of those funds this year for fully funding the following year. The MCOG planning contract with Davy Bates Consulting expires September 30th unless extended by the board. We don't know what's going to happen with that until the committees meet and the board meets and makes the decision on that. So we will be using estimates for those work elements, and hopefully we'll have more information by the time the final is done in June. So any questions on that? Okay.
Looks like none.
Okay, and then the next item is a report on local agency training. So within this work program that I just referred to, we have work element 14, which includes funding every year for local agency training. It typically is funded at $5,000 per year, and there's usually carryover funds. They don't spend it every year. So every couple of years, we MCOG asks the TAC if there's a training program that they would like us to bring in as a roadshow. And so this year, the TAC supported bringing in from UC Berkeley Tech Transfer Program the training for traffic control for safer work zones. So I think Nafili mentioned this in her presentation earlier, but the training was held last week at the Ukiah Conference Center. It was well attended with 30 attendees from the county and the 4 cities. And just to give you a report on how much it cost. So we rent the conference center, and we pay UC Berkeley Tech Transfer Program, the program and their trainer, and then we fund the breakfast refreshments and lunch for the group for an all-day training. And the total was about $6,620. So divided among the 30 trainees, that's roughly $220 per person, so we think that's a good value. It would cost much more if we sent them to Sacramento or out of town, or if your agency sent them and paid travel costs and hotel costs and registration. So we're happy that the local agencies are taking advantage of that. And that happens about every 2 years. And on the off year, agencies are using the training funds to request travel costs to various trainings for transportation related field. And it's a good program. It's a good use of the funds in the work element. Any questions? Do you have any miscellaneous?
I don't have any miscellaneous.
I don't have any miscellaneous. Okay.
Did you have any miscellaneous items you wanted to discuss? Okay, so then we're on to MCOG Directors reports. Any board members with our first meeting of the year have anything want to report? Okay, and I don't know that there's anything to report for CALCOG. Does staff know of anything to say about CALCOG? Anything between now and our next board meeting?
Well, there's the forum coming up in March, right, in Yosemite this year.
Yes, there is a forum coming up in March in Yosemite. I did recently go to the CALCOG, the CDAC, which is the COG Directors Association of California. So it's the executive directors of the CALCOG members meeting. And of course, the big talk at that meeting was what's coming up with the new administration at the state. In your information packet, I have included a summary of legislation of interest that was discussed at that meeting. There's a lot of housing-related items and a couple items that are highlighted. One in particular would require, it's been proposed legislation that would require a percentage of the SHOP funds, which are the State Highway Operation and Protection Program. That's the funding source that provides the majority of improvements on the state highways, like guardrails, bridge replacements, so projects big and small on the state highway system. There's a proposition, legislative proposition, that a portion of that be dedicated to bicycle and transportation improvements on the state highway system. So that's something that we'll be following, and CALCOG will be following as well. I think that is, that's the only thing that I wanted to highlight about that. One other item that was discussed was, and some of you may have heard this in the governor's budget rollout, there was sort of a mention that certain transportation funds might be tied to housing production. But there was this sort of vague statement and no one quite knew what it meant. And so what we have been hearing is that the state agencies, they haven't actually seen anything concrete, so they think that's just sort of something conceptual at this point. There's no concrete proposal that's come out at this point, and if there was, there would be a whole a process before anything was finalized. So that's something that we will be really following. It's something that CALCOG, I know, will be following for all of the COGs, and something that we'll make sure that we voice any concerns over that. But I think that's kind of all I've got to say about CALCOG.
Well, there is a forum coming up on your board calendar just adopted. There's a note at the bottom of some of these extra meetings, meetings of interest. And so that's for delegates, staff, really any board members are interested at all could go to that. We do have some travel funds in the administration budget, so do let us know if that's something you're interested in doing, and I'd recommend it for our new delegate, definitely. It's terrific training opportunity, networking opportunity. We always find out about the latest cutting edge things going on in our transportation world, and those other issues that regional agencies deal with. And so it was a lot of fun, very informative. So we'd happy to fund you to travel to that. It's been in Monterey every year until this year, and suddenly it's in Yosemite. So I hope the weather permits trips up there.
More information about that?
Yeah, and go to calcog.org. That's down here on your calendar for starters. Yeah, I can get you further information on that. Usually by now they should have posted something on the upcoming forum on that website.
Okay, well, before we leave, we'll adjourn the meeting, but before we leave, people can meet with MCOG staff to work out some committee meetings that are going to be set up between now and our March meeting. So with that, we're going to adjourn the meeting at 3:50.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.